Welcome to the Refuge of St. Joseph channel. Today our prayer will be the power of St. Joseph to attract wealth. Like the video, subscribe, and share it so this prayer reaches the people you love. Maybe tonight your hands feel a little colder than usual as you hold a stack of bills, or a phone that keeps lighting up with reminders you wish you could ignore. Maybe you have done everything you know to do, worked hard, cut back, prayed in the car between errands, and still there is a quiet ache that asks, will it be enough? I want you to hear this with the weight it deserves. You are not alone. You are not failing, and your desire for stability and provision is holy. The Church does not shame this desire. It purifies it, orders it, and blesses it with wisdom. Stay with me. Let your heart settle into a slower rhythm, like a workshop at dusk when the tools are finally quiet and the wood holds the warmth of a long day's work. When we speak of wealth here, we are not talking about trophies that glitter in anxious hands. We are speaking of a prosperity that begins in the soul and then ripples outward. A roof that does not leak, a table that has enough, work that keeps your dignity intact, time to rest on Sunday, and the freedom to be generous without fear. That kind of wealth does not arrive through frenzy or superstition. It grows from trust and craftsmanship, from ordered decisions and faithful routines. It is built the way a carpenter builds a table: measured, cut, sanded, finished. It is a slow good thing, and slow good things usually last. St. Joseph enters this conversation gently, as he always does. He does not arrive with trumpets or quick fixes. He stands near like a father who knows the language of silence and the weight of responsibility. He understands what it means to protect a home when resources are limited, to choose obedience when plans change, to work with hands that are sometimes tired and sometimes hopeful. Joseph does not perform tricks. He teaches a way. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust divine providence. In the school of St. Joseph, panic becomes prayer, and work becomes worship. And while we walk, his steady presence repeats in our hearts what we most need to hear. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Before we go any further, let us speak to your body, because your body has been carrying this story. Notice your shoulders. Notice how they rise when money enters the room of your mind. Notice the chest that tightens when you think of the future, the jaw that clenches when you remember a mistake. This is not weakness. This is the nervous system doing its best to keep you safe. When fear shows up, the brain's alarm centers, the amygdala among them, can flood you with signals to fight, to run, or to freeze. But the same God who knit you together also gave you a way to calm the alarm with simple habits of breath, attention, and prayer. Practical spirituality and emotional neuroscience meet here. As breath slows, the body tells the brain it is safe to listen. As prayer anchors the breath, the heart remembers it is not alone. Try this with me. Sit with your feet grounded as if they were touching the floor of Joseph's workshop. Imagine the scent of wood and oil, the soft rasp of a plane, the light falling across a well-used bench. Inhale for a gentle count of 4, and imagine you are breathing in Christ's peace. Hold that breath for a count of 2, as if you were letting it soak into the grain. Exhale for a slow count of 6 and release what you cannot control. Whisper, not as magic, but as a child speaks to a father. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Repeat the breath. 4 to receive, 2 to rest, 6 to surrender. Again, 4 to receive, 2 to rest, 6 to surrender. You are teaching your nervous system to make room for grace. You are sanding the rough edges of fear with the rhythm of trust. You may tell me, but my numbers are what they are, and you would be right. Faith does not erase math. It reforms the heart that does the math. Joseph teaches us that ordered hearts make ordered choices, and ordered choices, over days and weeks and months, shape a life that can hold provision without being owned by it. Wealth without attachment is possible. Peace inside pressure is possible. Generosity inside limits is possible. Not because we earn miracles, but because providence meets preparation, and grace loves to work with what we place on the bench. Picture Joseph's hands. They are not perfect hands. They are practiced hands. They do what they can with what they have, one measured movement at a time. In his silence there is a kind of instruction. Slow down enough to measure before you cut. Be courageous enough to cut what does not serve your vocation. Be patient enough to sand the corners of your habits. Be faithful enough to finish what you begin. This is the rhythm of a saint who entrusted everything to God and still showed up to the workshop at dawn. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer, and every prayer strengthens the work. If shame has been your companion, shame for past choices, shame for debts, shame for asking for help, let it rest now. Shame tightens the breath, blurs the mind, and makes wise choices feel out of reach. Grace lifts the chin, clears the gaze, and gives you back your agency. The gospel does not humiliate the poor. It honors them and invites all of us into justice and mercy. Joseph, the just man, models integrity that does not bend when pressure rises. He reminds us that God's timing is not late, and God's care does not fail, and human dignity is never a luxury item. You are allowed to begin again, and again, and again, because God is not counting your starts. He is fathering your return. There is a reason we will return more than once to this prayer. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Repetition here is not filler, it is formation. Each time you say it, the words lay another plank across the gap between fear and trust. Each time you breathe it, the heart grows a little steadier, the mind a little clearer, the will a little stronger. Strategic repetition is not about forcing an outcome. It is about training attention to stay with the truth when emotions wander. Tonight this truth is simple and strong. Providence is real, work is holy, generosity multiplies, rest restores, and you are not alone. If you can, place one concrete burden on the bench before God. Name it plainly. The balance on the card, the rent coming due, the repair you cannot afford, the job search that is wearing you thin. Do not dress it up or hide it. Bring it forward exactly as it is, like a rough plank before the first cut. Now imagine Joseph standing beside you, saying nothing, only nodding with a kindness that steadies the soul. Feel your breath slow. Feel the jaw unhook. Feel the ground hold you. Inhale peace for 4, rest for 2, release for 6. Speak the line once more, gently. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. What we begin together is not a sprint toward money. It is a pilgrimage toward freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of worry. Freedom from the lie that your worth equals your wage. Freedom from the need to impress strangers while those you love wait for your undistracted presence. We will move with patience and with purpose, guided by a saint who understands ordinary life better than most, and supported by a God who delights in your flourishing. Nothing false, nothing loud, nothing manipulative, only the quiet work of transformation that happens when a heart consents to be taught. Let this be our starting covenant. We will not chase quick fixes or bow to fear. We will attend to the small, faithful steps that change the day. We will honor Sunday as a sign that the world runs on grace. We will practice generosity as an act of trust. We will carry our work to prayer and our prayer back into work. We will learn to measure before we cut, to cut what harms our peace, to sand what is rough in our habits, to finish what protects our home. And when we forget, as we all do, we will begin again without drama, because love is patient and holiness is usually quiet. Stay with this final breath before we continue. Feet grounded, shoulders lowered, hands open. Inhale the peace you did not earn, but are freely given. Hold it as if setting it into the grain. Exhale the story that says you have to carry everything alone. And while you breathe, let the words move through you like a steady heartbeat. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. There are evenings when the mind circles numbers like a hawk over a quiet field, returning to the same figures, the same due dates, the same what-ifs, until sleep becomes a hallway of flickering lights. In that hallway, comparison often waits with folded arms. Someone else seems to carry lighter bills, someone else seems to climb faster, someone else receives calls that never reach your phone. The chest tightens, the jaw sets, and the body stores the story, as if survival depended on rehearsing it. This is not failure. This is a nervous system seeking safety. Yet beneath the static, a gentler frequency is already playing, the steady music of a father who knows what is needed before a word is spoken. The quiet confidence of Nazareth, where provision came wrapped in patience and fidelity. Anxiety changes the shape of time. Minutes stretch into doubts, and days shrink into a single question mark. The mind, trying to help, becomes a forecaster of catastrophes, an expert in worst-case scenarios, a collector of unfinished conversations that never happened. Trust feels naive when fear is loud. Still, fear is not the whole truth about the future. Fear is only the loudest voice in the room when exhaustion steals everyone else's microphone. When breath lengthens, other voices become audible. The voice that remembers past rescues. The voice that recognizes small daily bread arriving on ordinary mornings. The voice that can finally hear the promise. Your Father knows. In that space, the heart often finds words it forgot it knew. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Over-control wears a mask that looks like responsibility. Lists multiply, contingency plans stack, vigilance never clocks out. Control feels safer than surrender, because surrender gets confused with passivity. Yet the gospel reveals something quieter and stronger. Surrender as relationship, not collapse. entrustment as cooperation, not avoidance. Joseph models this paradox with ease. He rises to protect, to provide, to change plans when heaven redirects, yet he never confuses his role with God's role. He acts, and then he rests. He listens, and then he builds. He protects, and then he trusts. In that rhythm, control loosens its grip, and courage takes its place. The soul discovers that providence meets preparation more reliably than panic ever will. Comparison turns neighbors into measuring sticks and converts blessings into threats. Someone else's promotion becomes evidence against one's own path. Someone else's stability becomes proof of personal deficiency. The math of envy always subtracts dignity from both sides of the equation. Joseph's way dissolves the ledger-keeping score of other people's lives. Nazareth was not a stage, it was a home. The workshop did not need applause to become holy space. The wood did not need to be exotic to become beautiful. Under that simplicity, envy withers and gratitude stretches its limbs like a worker at daybreak. Gratitude does not silence ambition, it purifies it, returning desire to its right proportions, so that the heart seeks fruitfulness rather than spectacle. There is also the ache of stories carried from childhood, the family scripts about money, the unspoken vows made in lean seasons, the learned reflex to expect the worst, so disappointment hurts less. Emotional memory is quick. It paints the present with colors borrowed from the past. Neuroscience gives language for this. Old pathways fire quickly. Familiar alarms travel fast. Grace offers a patient reply. New pathways can be practiced. Alarms can learn the difference between danger and discomfort. Spirituality that honors the body helps those pathways grow. As the system settles, wisdom re-enters the room, and choices appear that panic kept off stage. In that clarity, a prayer rises without forcing itself. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The heart knows when it is living on fumes, snapping at loved ones after a long day, scrolling past bedtime while the mind negotiates with itself, saying yes to everything because saying no feels like betrayal. These are signs not of moral collapse but of depletion. Providence is not magic, it is relationship, and relationships breathe. Rest is not a luxury for the rich, it is a command given to the beloved. When rest is honored, even in small faithful ways, scarcity loses some of its theater, and problems step down from thundercloud size to human size. Then, the next right step becomes visible, modest, doable, unglamorous, blessed. The temptation to solve fear with volume, more hours, more hustle, more noise, often drowns out the single word that heals. Enough. Enough for today. Enough strength for the task at hand. Enough grace to meet this hour. Joseph's life spells that word in wood and sweat and quiet laughter at the table. He does not announce it, he embodies it. The family he guarded did not live by spectacle but by faithfulness, and that faithfulness carried the weight of heaven's plan. The same pattern can hold an anxious heart. Small obediences, kept consistently, build a floor that can carry real life without breaking. Sometimes the barriers are less dramatic and more mundane. A habit of postponing what feels intimidating, a reluctance to ask for wisdom from someone trustworthy, a drifting attention that scatters energy across too many open tabs in the mind. These are not moral crises, they are leaks in the vessel. Joseph's silence repairs them. Silence focuses attention. Attention restores presence. Presence allows the soul to perceive subtle guidance, a conversation to schedule, a task to finish, an expense to release, a boundary to honor. In presence, guilt loosens and responsibility matures. Self-accusation yields to steady courage. At the bottom of the worry lies a question about worth. If provision falters, does value falter too? If work is unstable, is identity unstable? Joseph answers without rhetoric. Worth is received, not earned. Identity is bestowed, not constructed. Dignity is inherent, not negotiated. This truth steadies hands that tremble over spreadsheets and soothes minds that search the horizon for signs of rejection. When identity rests, decisions improve. When decisions improve, outcomes change their texture over time. The arc may be long, but the wood holds the curve. What blocks providence, then, is not merely bad luck or hostile circumstances. It is the slow, invisible tightening that narrows the soul's window until light looks like a stranger. Anxiety, comparison, and over-control are understandable responses to pain, yet they rarely deliver the safety they advertise. The way of Joseph widens the window without denying the weather. It returns attention to the presence that outlasts uncertainty. It opens a path where breath becomes prayer, work becomes offering, and tomorrow no longer steals today. And when the window opens even a little, The old sentence sounds less like wishful thinking and more like home. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. There is a small word that quietly carries the weight of an entire life. Just, not flashy, not marketable, not the kind of word that trends, and yet it is the hinge on which real prosperity turns. Joseph, being a just man, the line enters like a whisper and changes the room. Just, not as a narrow legalism, but as a life made whole, aligned, integrated. Just, as in square and true, like a table that does not wobble when a family rests their elbows and their worries upon it. In that firmness, fear finds fewer places to hide, and decisions begin to hold steady under the weight of reality. Justice, in Joseph's hands, looks less like speeches and more like measurements that are honest, promises that are kept, and labor that carries love in its grain. The ancient word behind just speaks of a person rightly ordered before God, within the self, and toward others. Order here is not control, it is harmony. The heart points toward the good, the mind tells the truth, the body follows through, and the neighbor is seen as kin rather than competition. In this harmony, wealth takes on a different meaning. It is no longer the loudness of accumulation, but the quiet sufficiency that makes room for generosity, rest, and dignity. It is the kind of provision that does not tremble when markets sway because its first investment is character, and character does not crash. Joseph's righteousness is not separate from money. It is the atmosphere in which money stops ruling and starts serving. The workshop of Nazareth becomes a school for this kind of prosperity. The square meets the wood. The line marks the path of the saw. The hand moves with patience rather than haste, and each cut is faithful to the mark. In that fidelity, the ordinary transforms into inheritance. A door that closes flush tells the truth about the craft behind it. A bill paid on time tells the truth about the person behind the signature. Integrity builds rooms where children sleep without hearing the murmurs of avoidable chaos. Holiness is not allergic to detail. It loves detail because love pays attention. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. The sentence sits quietly on the bench and sanctifies the day. There is a mystery here that both faith and neuroscience can recognize. Chronic dissonance, saying one thing, doing another, keeps the internal alarms buzzing. The nervous system learns to brace. The mind spends energy tracking inconsistencies, and the body carries a background hum of unease. Harmony, on the other hand, lowers the noise. When speech and action align, when values and choices meet in the same place, the brain wastes less fuel on self-surveillance and frees attention for creativity, problem-solving, and steady courage. Justice calms the circuits that panic in flames. The soul breathes easier, and the world looks more negotiable because inner contradiction is no longer adding extra weight to every decision. Everyday scenes tell the story more simply than theories. A craftsman quotes a timeline and honors it, even if no one checks. A nurse counts medications twice because human life is not a place for shortcuts. A driver's hand refuses the easy lie on a mileage log that no one would catch. A manager refuses to weaponize confusion against a tired employee. A client hears a delay explained with clarity rather than excuses. None of these moments trends. All of them build a life that can carry blessing without splitting at the seams. The ledger of heaven reads these lines in a different ink, and providence, mysterious as it remains, seems to meet this steadiness with its own. Catholic social teaching breathes through this atmosphere like fresh air through a clean window. Work bears dignity, persons outrank profit. The poor are not an afterthought but a priority of love. The earth is received, not exploited. Justice here is not draped in severity. It is clothed in mercy and truth. In such a climate, wealth ceases to be a trophy and becomes a tool. The home grows warmer, the table longer, the Sabbath quieter, and the hand more open. The heart discovers that contentment expands rather than shrinks desire, turning ambition away from spectacle and toward fruitfulness. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust divine providence. The sentence does not remove effort, it removes panic from effort. The shape of Joseph's justice can also be heard in silence. He speaks little and listens deeply, and listening itself becomes an act of righteousness. Listening to God's interruptions without bitterness, listening to Mary's mystery without suspicion, listening to the child who would one day call blessed the poor, the meek, the pure of heart. In this listening, motives become clean. The search for approval loosens its grip. The need to appear successful gives way to the desire to be faithful. A just soul can hear subtle guidance because the inner static has been turned down. A just soul can wait without self-contempt because identity is no longer rented from outcomes. Money acquired by bending truth often evaporates like morning mist. It shines, while the air is cool and disappears when the day begins to ask questions. Money welcomed through justice carries a different weight. It does not humiliate the conscience. It does not require a second story to explain itself. It does not demand a closed fist to keep it safe. It sits quietly where it is placed and awaits its mission: to sustain a home, to educate a child, to honor a debt, to ease a neighbor's burden, to keep Sunday free from the noise of scrambling. Wealth that enters through the door of righteousness tends to stay, because the house that receives it has strong beams. There is tenderness in this path, not severity. Joseph's righteousness does not scold, it steadies. Shame has no home in his workshop, because shame warps the hands that it touches and turns attention inward in the least helpful way. Grace, by contrast, lifts the gaze to what is possible and true, then places the tools back where they belong. A just life is not a flawless life, it is a reconciled one. When mistakes happen, truth tells them plainly, and repair follows without theater. When temptation knocks, the remembered face of those who depend on one's fidelity has more gravity than the fantasy of quick gain. Love makes justice feel like warmth rather than like a rule. The word just, repeated like a soft hammer tapping joints into place, forms a cadence the heart can follow. Joseph, the just. Joseph, the whole. Joseph, the steady. Each repetition writes another line in the grain of memory, teaching the body that peace is not naivete, but the fruit of coherence. In that coherence, choices that once felt foggy become clearer. The calendar begins to tell the truth about priorities. The bank statement begins to reflect values rather than moods. The face in the mirror looks less defensive and more at rest. The prayer that keeps returning: St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us, no longer sounds like a desperate flare in the dark. It sounds like a pledge of companionship that will not leave when doors close and lights dim. A house built on justice does not fear the wind. It hears it certainly, and may feel the windows tremble on certain nights, but the frame holds. The hands that built it were honest with the measurements, faithful with the materials, patient with the process. The same hands bless the table before the meal, touch the forehead of a child, and when no one is watching, rest quietly in gratitude. In that home, prosperity loses its fever and gains a pulse. It beats with mercy, with prudence, with generosity, with rest. It becomes the kind of wealth that can be shared without breaking the giver. It becomes the kind of witness that quietly teaches a city how to breathe. And so, the line returns, simple and sufficient, a sentence sturdy enough to hold the weight of hope. Joseph, the just. In his shadow, character becomes a shelter, labor becomes praise, and provision learns to serve love. The heart that once sprinted after certainty learns to walk at the speed of trust, and even the numbers over time begin to change their tone. In that gentle shift, the soul knows what it has suspected all along. True prosperity is born where truth abides, and in that place, every good gift is received with open hands and a quiet amen. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. There is a kind of fear that looks for handles on the invisible, a way to feel in charge when the numbers do not listen. In that fear, the heart reaches for shortcuts that promise to bend reality with a gesture, a sentence, a symbol treated like a lever. The soul is not foolish for wanting relief. It is human, yet love does not deal in levers, and saints do not sign contracts with panic. Joseph does not stand in the corner of a room as a charm to coax the universe into obedience. He stands beside a family as a father who teaches a way of being that can bear the weight of blessing without breaking beneath it. Superstition often grows where exhaustion has lived for too long. The anxious brain, craving certainty, becomes fond of little bargains. If this prayer is said in exactly this way, if this candle burns at precisely this hour, if this statue points toward this door, then maybe the next bill will pay itself. Neuroscience recognizes the appeal. Random rewards train the mind to repeat whatever seemed nearby when relief arrived, creating a loop that feels like control, while offering only coincidence dressed in ritual. Faith is not a loop. Faith is a relationship that steadies perception, clarifies motives, and restores agency. In that relationship, the will remains free, the mind remains awake, and prayer turns from transaction into trust. Joseph's presence reveals a different grammar for prosperity. Not a button to press, but a pattern to inhabit. Not an incantation, but an alignment. He listens more than he speaks. He acts without spectacle. He protects without theatrics. He earns with quiet hands and a steady gaze that keeps love at the center. In his company, money stops being a verdict on worth and becomes a material to be handled with justice, mercy, and restraint. The house grows warmer, not because coins appear from nowhere, but because peace makes room for wisdom Wisdom improves decisions, and decisions, repeated with patience, reshape the horizon. There is an ache that asks why quick outcomes should be considered unholy. The answer is gentle. Quick outcomes are not enemies. Despairing shortcuts are. The difference is interior. One springs from clarity and preparation meeting opportunity, the other from a hurried attempt to escape vulnerability. The first strengthens identity. The second mortgages it. Joseph's way does not despise swift answers when they are given. It simply refuses to worship them, knowing that character outlives windfalls, and that gratitude tastes the same, whether provision arrives by the spoon or by the ladle. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust divine providence. Trust does not rush the calendar, and it does not freeze the hands. It walks, attentive and unafraid. Many hearts carry stories of disappointed rituals, whispered promises made to the sky that seem to return empty. Disappointment like that can bruise faith, until faith flinches at every invitation. Yet beneath the bruise, a truer desire remains, not for tricks, but for companionship that does not vanish when plans unravel. Joseph offers precisely this: companionship that does not argue with reality, that sits at the table with the unpaid bill and the tired parent, and the worry that will not sleep, and in that sitting, restores the room's temperature to human. Panic loses its echo. Options step forward that hid when the lights were loud. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The sentence lands like a hand on a shoulder rather than like a spell in the air. The Church speaks of sacramentals, signs that open the senses to grace, that remind the body it belongs to hope. Water touched and blessed, beads rubbed thin by prayer, images that focus a wandering gaze. These are windows, not vending machines. The difference matters, not to satisfy theologians only, but to safeguard the heart from the fatigue of disappointed magic. A window invites light. It does not manufacture the sun. Joseph is a window of this kind. Through him, the light of Christ enters ordinary rooms and sanctifies ordinary tasks, until the ordinary reveals itself as the very place where heaven loves to work. When love becomes the motive, the nervous system hears a new message. Instead of frantic spikes of false certainty, steadier rhythms emerge. The breath grows longer. The prefrontal quiets the alarms that once dictated the room. Attention returns to what can be chosen today without despising what cannot. The mind that once chased signs begins to recognize patterns. How honesty reduces hidden costs. How planning cools late-night dread. How rest restores the clarity that poor decisions kept stealing. In that clarity, prosperity changes its accent. It speaks less of luck and more of fidelity, less of spectacle and more of sufficiency, less of possession and more of purpose. Imagine the workshop at dusk. The tools are returned to their places. The bench is brushed clean. The door is set on its hinges with a quiet satisfaction that needs no witness. Nothing explosive happens. Everything essential happens. A home will sleep a little safer because the hinge will not fail when the wind leans hard against it. Joseph's life turns the soul toward hinges like these. Little acts of truth that hold when weather comes. Little habits that seem too small to matter until the day they are the only things that do. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. Work, then, is no longer a frantic bargaining chip but a steady offering that keeps the heart free enough to be generous. Some will say that this path is too slow for desperate needs, and the sorrow in that protest deserves honor. There are emergencies that do not wait for the calendar to turn, yet even in urgency, the soul benefits from companions who refuse to panic with it while refusing to abandon it. Joseph is such a companion. He does not promise a staircase where there is none. He brings a lantern and stands at the first step that actually exists. Courage grows in that kind light. A phone call is made that shame avoided. A conversation unfolds that pride postponed. A neighbor's kindness is received without the armor that used to block it. Providence often travels along such quiet rails. The expectation breaker is simple enough to fit on the smallest scrap of paper, and strong enough to alter a life. Joseph is not a talisman. He is a teacher of trust. He does not bend the world to our fear. He bends fear toward the Father. He does not conjure wealth. He prepares a soul that can steward it without losing itself. He does not erase labor. He sanctifies it. He does not silence desire. He purifies it until it seeks fruitfulness instead of applause. Under his shadow, transactions become relationships. Scarcity meets companionship, and hope learns how to speak in a tone that holds through the night. And so the sentence returns with the softness and strength of something truer than panic. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Spoken at a kitchen table, it sounds like courage learning to breathe. Whispered in a parking lot, it sounds like dignity remembering its name. Murmured before a shift begins, It sounds like intention choosing love over hurry. The heart that once searched for a lever discovers a hand to hold, and the soul that once chased certainty discovers a Father who does not leave. In that discovery, the future is no longer a door to break open. It is a doorway to walk through with a companion who knows the way. There is a rhythm that steadies a house the way a beam steadies a roof. It is older than strategy and gentler than pressure. It moves like breath, receiving, offering, giving away, and pausing. And under its cadence, the soul remembers that life is more than a ledger. In the company of Joseph, this rhythm takes on 4 quiet words that shape the day without shouting at it. Pray, work, share, rest. Not slogans, not a program to impress anyone. Simply the way a heart stays aligned with God while carrying real responsibilities in a real world that often feels like too much. In this cadence, provision stops being a cliff and becomes a path, one step long enough for today. Prayer, in Joseph's house, does not perform. It holds. It holds the first light of morning before hurry can spend it. It holds the small ache that wakes before the alarm. It holds the names of those who are depending on the strength that will be needed by noon. Prayer here is not a transaction but a homecoming. 10 or 15 quiet minutes borrowed from noise become a room where attention rests in God as simply as wood rests on a bench. The body understands such rooms. Breath grows longer. The nervous system loosens its grip on alarm and makes space for the prefrontal calm that chooses wisely. The heart, feeling seen, begins to unclench the future and let providence speak in its own tone. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The words, repeated with humility, set the day's center of gravity where it will not collapse. Work follows, not as punishment, not as a frantic bid to earn love, but as the ordinary altar where love is offered. With Joseph, tasks turn into craft, and craft turns into care. A list with 3 honest priorities tells the truth about limits and honors the truth about focus. The mind, no longer split into a dozen distracted directions, tastes again the satisfaction of finishing something that matters. Neuroscience names what the soul already knows. Completion rewards attention with a gentle surge of energy that makes the next good choice easier. The spared cost of scattered effort becomes a kind of saved currency, and the hours stretch just enough to carry what they must. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. The sentence softens the jaw and steadies the hands when pressure tries to turn dignity into hurry. Sharing enters as warmth, not as loss. Scarcity teaches clenched fists. Providence teaches open hands that still know how to weigh responsibility. A simple percentage, chosen with honesty and held with tenderness, turns money into mission without turning the giver into a martyr. In that opening, the heart learns a strange arithmetic. What leaves in love returns as peace. The ledger may not show it in columns, but the body feels it in sleep that finally deepens, in breath that no longer rushes, in the way children look longer at a face that is not haunted by the fear of never enough. Catholic social teaching has always spoken this language. Persons before profit, the vulnerable at the center, the common good as the true gain. Generosity becomes the practice that keeps wealth from curling inward and choking the joy it was meant to nourish. Rest completes the measure. The week is not a wheel that spins until it breaks. It is a pilgrimage that returns to a day set apart, where God's voice is given room to be heard over the clatter of necessity. Sabbath in Joseph's home would have sounded like simpler laughter, slower meals, tools sleeping where they belong, and eyes that notice each other without the film of fatigue. Rest is not the absence of responsibility. It is consent to be a creature in a world that runs on grace. Bodies that stop to breathe learn again to tell the difference between danger and hurry, between duty and compulsion. Minds that pause find edges and shapes in problems that looked like fog the day before. The soul lifts its face toward the giver and remembers that being loved precedes being productive. Always. Within this rule, time becomes a friend. Mornings stop ambushing the heart. They greet it. Afternoons lose some of their frantic bargaining. They carry one task a little further than yesterday with a steadier hand. Evenings begin to cool the mind's temperature instead of stoking it. Night becomes a sacrament of trust, rather than a courtroom of self-accusation. The cycle does not erase hardship. Bills still arrive. Deadlines still crowd. Surprises still rearrange a careful calendar, but the house itself changes tone. The walls learn the sound of hope. The table whispers welcome. The floor beneath the feet holds more firmly when the wind remembers where you live. This cadence is not a test, it is a companion. On days when prayer feels thin, the rule holds the place where conversation with God will grow again. On days when work disappoints, the rule keeps despair from swallowing identity. On days when sharing pinches, The rule reminds the heart that it has survived pinches before and found joy on the other side. On days when rest is interrupted, the rule keeps the ember alive for the next possible quiet. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust divine providence. Trust here is not a mood. It is a muscle strengthened by repetitions that no one else may notice but heaven honors with a father's smile. Stories begin to alter under such a rhythm. A house once echoing with financial arguments learns a gentler vocabulary. A worker once swallowed by self-doubt starts to hear gratitude from a client who noticed the difference that craftsmanship makes. A giver who once feared every open hand begins to recognize the face of Christ where anxiety once saw only a threat. Sleep returns, not as a prize, but as a promise kept. Focus deepens, not as a show of willpower, but as an aftertaste of prayer. Even conflict grows cleaner. Truth, spoken without drama, finds ears more ready to hear when rest has lowered the room's volume. Joseph's presence threads these 4 words into one fabric. The same hands that fold in prayer hold tools with care, open in generosity, and release the weak into God's keeping when sundown arrives. Integrity ties the days together, so that prosperity can enter without having to hide. Wealth shifts from spotlight to service. It turns the lights on, keeps the pantry honest, repairs what needs repair, and leaves margins where laughter can fit. The anxious part of the mind, seeing the reliability of this pattern, loosens its grip little by little. The body, tracking the predictability, grants access to deeper calm more quickly. The soul, no longer split in 3 directions, remembers how to recognize joy without interrogating it. The providence rule speaks softly, like a father tucking a blanket around a child before turning off the lamp. Pray, work, share, rest. The words walk a house in the evening and set things back where they belong. They do not promise spectacle, they promise steadiness. Under their care, numbers still matter and plans still count, but neither becomes a tyrant. Under their care, the face in the mirror looks a shade more peaceful each week, and the table looks a shade more like an altar, and the future looks a shade more like a road that will meet you kindly when you arrive. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. In the echo of that prayer, the 4-fold rhythm continues. Patient as the seasons, faithful as the hand that holds you. In a quiet room, light falls across a wooden bench the way grace falls across a life. Gently, without fanfare, revealing grain that was always there. The air holds the fragrance of cedar and oil. The tools rest where practiced hands last placed them. Nothing here rushes. Nothing here begs for applause. In this room, prosperity is not a spectacle to chase, but a form to be shaped. The heart that enters learns almost by breathing that God's care moves like craftsmanship, measured, decisive, patient, faithful. The soul begins to understand that healing does not shout, it hums, and the hum is steady. Measure becomes the first language of wisdom. Not the harsh scrutiny that shames, but the honest gaze that tells the truth about what is in front of us and what it is for. A plank set beneath the square shows its angles without defensiveness. Purpose shows its lines the same way when it stands beneath the light of prayer. Where the piece belongs, what weight it must carry, what length will serve the design. Such questions steady the hand before any blade touches the wood. Neuroscience notices how clarity calms the body. The amygdala releases its grip when the mind can see edges and lengths, when uncertainty is named and held. In that state, breath finds a slower riverbed, and attention, no longer splintered, begins to flow in one direction long enough to matter. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The words fall like light on a ruler, making honest lines visible again. Cut follows measure as night follows dusk. A decisive moment arrives, not to punish, but to free the piece from what it cannot carry into its future shape. The sound is not angry, it is clean. Fibers part with intention, and what remains can now fit where it belongs. Hearts know this sound. It echoes in choices that set boundaries without violence, in releases that feel like relief after long delay, in separations from habits that drained more than they gave. The nervous system recognizes the difference between loss and liberation. Muscles soften when a decision finally aligns with truth. There is a lift inside the chest that accompanies right renunciation, a space that opens for grace to sit where clutter once claimed the chair. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. Even the parting becomes worship when love stands at the center of it. Sanding arrives like mercy. The edges that were necessary to make the cut now soften under a steady hand. Roughness gives way to touch that will not snag skin later. Splinters yield their protest to patience. This stage is quieter than the saw. more intimate than the measure, and yet it may be the most transformative work of all. Motives are smoothed here. The need to prove yields to the desire to serve. The inner monologue that once accused learns a new vocabulary. Gentle, accurate, hopeful. The body, sensing safety in the rhythm, allows deeper breaths and a longer exhale. The prefrontal cortex, no longer hijacked by threat, begins to choose with nuance what panic once painted in black and white. The soul hears again the sentence that never grows old. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust divine providence. Trust feels less like a cliff and more like a floor. Finish does not mean perfection. It means fidelity brought all the way to the end. Oil touches the grain, and the hidden beauty rises like a story finally told. A sheen appears. Not flashy, not loud, just enough to say, this piece will endure the hands that will use it. The heart recognizes itself here when intentions become habits, when promises become dates on a calendar and signatures on a check, when generosity becomes a line that remains even when moods shift. Completion rewards the brain with a quiet joy that does not spike and crash. It spreads, as if the nervous system were exhaling from the inside. The room feels larger because the task has a name, a shape, and a place. Nothing left half-made needs to haunt the evening. Across days, the workshop's rhythm becomes a week that breathes. Mornings begin with light on the bench and words that anchor identity before outcomes arrive. Midday holds a clean decision or two that clear a path through clutter. Afternoons give time to the gentle work that refines, edits, and clarifies. Evenings receive the satisfaction of a surface that catches the light because someone stayed with it long enough. This is not spectacle, and so it can be sustained. This is not bravado, and so it does not collapse when questioned. Wealth takes on the quiet confidence of a table that does not wobble, a door that does not stick, a chair that holds the weight it was made to hold. Stories shift under this rhythm. A home that once held its breath learns to exhale. A calendar that once shouted becomes a companion that suggests. A face that once scanned rooms for threats learns to recognize gifts arriving in ordinary clothes. Even setbacks enter differently. They do not erase the work that preceded them, and they do not decide the meaning of the whole. A plan adjusted under providence often carries more peace than a plan executed without it. Joseph's shadow on the wall, steady and unhurried, becomes a kind of blessing that repeats without words. Stay with what is true. Keep love at the center. Let time do its work. There is kindness here for the parts of us that learn to rush, to hoard, to hide, to numb. The workshop does not shame those parts. It gives them better tools. The hands that once gripped too tightly learn the feel of the right pressure. The eyes that once scanned for danger learn the pleasure of detail that is finally safe to notice. The back that once bore more than it could carry learns to place the load where structure can hold it. Bodies remember places where they were well treated. They return more easily, and when they return, the soul has easier access to prayer. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Said here, it sounds like a benediction over every small fidelity that keeps a house standing. When the piece is finished, it does not exist for itself. It serves the table where bread is broken, the doorway where little feet will pass, the room where a tired worker will sit in quiet and remember the goodness of being alive. Prosperity looks like that in the end. Service that lasts, beauty that survives fingerprints, strength that does not have to shout. Numbers can reflect such goodness, and often they do, though not always on the schedule the heart prefers. Yet even in the waiting, a life shaped in this way holds peace with a firmness that surprises the old fears. It is hard to panic in a room that smells like oil and wood and prayer. Night comes. The tools return to their places. The bench is brushed clean, and the door closes with a sound that satisfies. The house rests because the day has been told the truth and held in love. Somewhere in that quiet, the line repeats itself like a heartbeat that has found its tempo. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The words are not a lever, they are a lantern. Under their light, the next ordinary day already begins to take shape, measured, cut, sanded, finished, until providence is no longer an idea, but the grain of a life that has welcomed God into every simple thing. Night has a way of gathering the day into a single breath. The small victories, the missteps, the unsolved numbers that still look back from a page, and placing them in the same quiet where God first spoke the world into being. In that quiet, nothing needs to pretend. The heart that has walked with Joseph can finally set down the tools of vigilance and feel how the room softens when love is trusted more than fear. Provision does not feel like a verdict here. It feels like a companionship that does not leave when the lights are low. The soul recognizes the temperature of home and lets the shoulders lower into it, as if memory itself were saying, "You are held." Words rise more gently when they are not asked to perform. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The sentence has become a path across the day, and now it becomes a pillow for the mind. It carries the weight of rent and groceries, of interviews and invoices, of plans that need time and time that needs grace. It carries the names of those who share the same table and the same roof, the same hopes and the same fatigue. It carries the ache that lingers after the calendar is closed, the one that asks whether goodness will meet tomorrow with the same patience it met today. Under Joseph's care, the answer sounds steady. Prayer takes the shape of gratitude before it asks anything further. Gratitude for the breath that did not abandon the body when worry tried to take it hostage. Gratitude for the work that taught something truer than hurry. Gratitude for the pause that kept dignity intact when pressure pushed. Gratitude for the silent help that no one else will ever see but heaven has already counted as love. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. The line gathers hammer and ledger, commute and kitchen, and lays them at the same altar where ordinary life becomes offering. The altar looks like a table tonight, and the offering looks like a heart that still believes. A question remains in the room, not sharp, not scolding, simply honest enough to open a door. If the Father reordered the inner life the way a craftsman reorders a bench, measure, cut, sand, finish, which decision would change first and quietly change the rest? The question does not demand an answer in this moment. It keeps company with the soul until clarity arrives without violence. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust divine providence. Trust means time is allowed to be time. Trust means tomorrow is not forced into tonight's shape. Trust means the seed is believed in even when the soil looks unremarkable. There is a blessing that Joseph knows how to speak without many words. It sounds like steadiness entering the bones. It sounds like shame loosening its hold on memory. It sounds like courage stepping into its proper size, neither brash nor small, simply ready. May homes receive such steadiness. May work be guarded from panic and crowned with craftsmanship. May generosity keep fear from curling the soul inward. May rest return as a weekly promise that the beloved are not kept alive by their own effort. May providence find open doors because the heart has learned again how to be a house. The prayer turns toward God with the simplicity of a child calling to a father in the dark. Holy Father, look kindly on those who worry and those who wait. Look kindly on those who labor and those who seek labor. Look kindly on those who give from little and those who finally receive without armor. Teach the body to remember calm, the mind to recognize truth, the will to love what is good. Teach the house to breathe again. Through the hands of Joseph, whom you entrusted with your own son, let fear be turned from a master into a messenger that reminds us to return to you. Let provision become a sign of your nearness rather than a test of our worth. Silence stretches like a warm blanket across the last few minutes, and even the unsolved things begin to feel less like threats and more like uncarved wood waiting for tomorrow's light. The heart can rest because the day has been told the truth. The truth is not complicated. God is faithful. Work can be holy. Wealth can serve love. Rest restores courage. Generosity multiplies peace. None of this is spectacle. All of it is strong. The strength is quiet enough to last. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. One more time, the sentence falls into the room like a key returning to its place by the door. The house knows the sound. The soul knows the sound. Under that sound, hope sleeps and wakes as if guarded by someone who understands how to keep watch without making a scene. And when morning returns, it will find the same fourfold rhythm waiting, the same prayer that steadies breath, the same work that honors dignity, the same sharing that keeps the table warm, the same rest that gives back the face to itself, until prosperity is not chased, but welcomed, and holiness looks exactly like a life that has learned how to be simple and strong.